It comes down to playing all three positions if you're a wide receiver in Kansas City. But who has the best spot outside taking on one-on-one in this version of Andy's offense today on Locked On Chiefs?
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. We're brought to you today by FanDuel. Check them out. Make every single moment more right now. Playoffs and onward all the way through the baseball season for this summer. They are hooking you up with all customers getting a boost or a bonus no matter what every single day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all the time, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're going to get started talking about the position group that is the talk of the town. Coming up, what do you do with Rashee Rice and the rest of the wide receiver group? This is Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. He's going to run everything down over on his Substack. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, as well as NFL 33, our Substack, where me and my staff talk about the whole league, and rgrfootball.com, where you can get even more Chiefs content. Thank you for watching today. Make sure you like, sub, and hit the bell here on YouTube because we are here every single day of the week for you, 5 days a week. Plus, that's like everybody here on Locked On Podcast Network. And you can get us and you can become a loco, an everyday Locked On Chiefs supporter. You can do that by subscribing and getting into the text line at 816-357-8781. A lot to talk about here. I'm pretty excited about it because we've been holding off on this one because the topic is so big. We're splitting the wide receivers. We're going to talk about guys that need to line up outside, be left on islands, take on the blocking for the outside run, do all of that. And it starts by having enough depth to replace anything that you have to do. It doesn't matter whether it's injury or, like we're going to talk coming up later, replacing Rashee Rice should he be suspended. A lot of difficult issues there. But we have to start with the man himself. It all comes down to Rashee Rice, who had a very specific path forward as a rookie, played a lot inside early, had a couple of troubles, along with everybody else who couldn't catch the ball last season. But as the season progressed, so did he. He got better. He got more confident. He grew in confidence for Patrick Mahomes. And later in the season, down the stretch run, he got a little bit more action outside. I am one that thinks that that's where he should be nearly full-time come 2024. When he's on the field, I want to see him attacking outside corners one-on-one where he can use his body and do some of the things that he was able to do at SMU, one-on-one, down the field, over the head. I like what we see there. And now that he's acclimated, I think it's the time to make that move. Do you agree, or do you want to see something different?
I agree for the most part. I think that Andy Reid is always a guy that's going to have his wide receivers running at all three positions. So they're all going to be mix and match at times. And I do think he's going to spend most of his time, the majority of his time, probably maybe 80, 85, maybe even higher than that percentage on the outside. I think that's where he belongs, and that's probably where his best usage is. But I could see a situation where in some matchups they move him inside. Maybe they move him, to where he's not on the line of scrimmage just because of the specific plays that they're running and the design of the plays. Lots of different ways that they could go.
I think that there are options there. And like you said, you always have to be able to be prepared to play everything. But in terms of maximizing what he can do, I think what we have to see here is an expansion of the field again to what we had a few years ago when there was fear out there. And we're going to talk tomorrow coming up about guys that run a lot of inside routes or should rotate in there a lot. The bottom line is speed with this team. It's coming back. They're making speedy sexy again. But in retrospect to that lengthens the field. It opens it up vertically, right? Rashee Rice can open it horizontally as well because he's done some damage from the inside. Now they have to pay a little bit more attention scheme-wise, the defensive coordinators do, to when he's lined up wide. And I think if they continue to do that, I think it sets the tone for that space between the hash mark and the numbers that I think you can make some ground up, whether it's running, whether it's short passes, especially to some of the non-highlight reel guys, that I think that's a really good place to attack this season.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that he is going to spend most of his time out there, and I do think that that takes advantage of his skill set the most. It's just going to be interesting to see how you mix and match in guys like Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, which we'll talk about here in just mention them, I guess, when we talk about replacing Rice. But there is going to be some mix and match, and he's going to be lining up in different spots. And, I would imagine there's going to be times where maybe he's on the field with a guy like Justin Watson, who is a lot like him, and maybe he's playing inside and Watson's playing outside in that regard. So it's going to be fun, because I think what you saw last season, and I think this is really the big thing I'm taking away from it, is what you saw is he understood his assignment when it came to being an inside receiver, being a slot receiver. He excelled at being a slot receiver, and this would be the next level of growth that he could hit. And he started doing that in the end of the season and into the playoffs. So I completely agree. I think that's where they're wanting him to go. And I know we're not talking about slots, but I think that's part of how they're going to use Worthy, is kind of the model for what they did with Rice last year to an extent. Different type of wide receiver, obviously, but I do think that he's going to be focusing there. So it's going to be fun to see how they get their big three wide receivers. And when I say big three, it's Worthy, it's Hollywood Brown, and it's Rashee Rice. And Rice is probably going to be lining up on the outside most of the time. Wouldn't be shocked to see Brown out there at times.
No, he definitely has to be at times, because he can run all three. With his veteran presence, you got to have somebody else that's on the other side of the field in the Z position that's still the most outside receiver in the 11 personnel. But I agree with you. I think the way that it dictates to the defense is particularly, especially if you have Travis and he to one side, you're rolling coverage, which is opening up the deep game for other speedy guys in Brown and Worthy and whoever else is out there. So it's about balancing or unbalancing the defense through your offensive formations. And I think that's the hidden aspect of this that Andy's really got to play with, and I'm sure they're experimenting with.
And you said something very key right there, and I think that's really what this all comes down to, is when you get Rashee Rice, and we're expecting that we're going to have to replace him, which we'll talk about next segment, but when you get Rashee Rice back, I think Andy's going to already have a pretty good idea of what some of these other guys can do in the offense. And then you're going to be in a situation where you throw Rashee Rice in there, and he can play in multiple different positions and do multiple different things and make the defense look at things differently than what they'd been doing the first couple of games where he's not eligible to play. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see what Andy draws up to use the basically extra weapon that they're going to be getting probably mid-season back in Rashee Rice.
And that's really the big question, is when that happens and how do you adjust for the lack of Rice? That's what we're going to get into next, because I think there's two very, very distinct ways to go about it. And it all depends on one skinny kid who just left Texas. How does Xavier Worthy change how you deal with the Rice situation? Next, here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, listen, I know you guys are just like me, and you love sports no matter what they are. Competition is competition, and you never really want them to end, but sometimes seasons come to an end, and you hit this part of the year where you're waiting for the next big thing. Right now, that's Major League Baseball, and FanDuel's here to keep that sports running whenever you want, no matter what you're looking for. All you have to do is open up the app. You can dream up any bets that you like whenever you feel like it. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, every last one of them, with either a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. Every day, every week, all summer long, they have a deal for you of some kind. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. You're going to be able to make the most of this for your summer before we get to football season. It's right around the corner. You might as well get into it now at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official betting partner of Major League Baseball. Locked On Sports today is our local hosts, not talking heads shouting at each other and making nonsense arguments, giving you the information that you want on the teams that you love. You can get it 24/7 here on YouTube by liking and subscribing there, and getting over on Amazon Fire TV. You can get that as well. It is Locked On Sports today. Today, we don't have specifics on Rashee Rice's availability and when, where, and otherwise, right? So
no idea when we're going to get that specific information either. That's the bigger problem.
The gamut is varied. We could see him suspended for the season. We could see him hit with a 6-gamer. We could see them defer until 2025. We just don't know. Yep. So for Andy Reid and the staff, we're trying to take their point of view and be prepared for anything. So if you're missing him a quarter of the season, if you're missing him half the season, if he's here the whole time, great if we don't have to do anything. But if you do, You got to have a plan, and probably at least two. I see two things that have to happen, and it really does come into when and where. If it's a 4 or 6 game suspension, I think it's really, really straightforward. You do a 1-for-1 swap. Rashee Rice goes to the suspension list. Justin Watson becomes a starter at his position. He, Worthy, if healthy, I'm still concerned about that, and Hollywood are your top three. You roll, you substitute as you normally would as though that were Rashee Rice. I think that's super simple. Would you start there if it's a short suspension?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to start. And I think that that's probably the direction that they're wanting to head, or at least based on what happened. Okay, so based on what we know right now and based on what we know happened last year, I think that that's the direction that they would go. Because to me, it makes sense to bring Watson in. They trust him. They trust him to run all three positions. They trust him to be in the right spot. And he had the ability to make plays last year for them. So I do think that that's probably the direction that they're going to go. The question becomes, what happens if he's not going to be somebody that's going to be challenging enough to, make the defense honest with him running out of that position? Because if he isn't, then you run into another situation, and then you have a question of, okay, I have Justin Watson and Hollywood Brown as my main receivers, as my main starters. Don't get me wrong. I think Worthy's going to be there too, but you're looking at your top two guys. Then you have Travis Kelce running out of the tight end position, and Kansas City, I think, is going to run a lot of two tight end sets. So maybe you're not going to have Worthy on the field as much. Is it going to be something that's going to be a little bit different? We're going to have to wait and see. I think that it makes a ton of sense to put Watson in there. He has the best body type to kind of replace that type of wide receiver. But it's a question of how effective he can be, and if Andy can take advantage of what Watson's able to do and be successful with what Watson can do to open things up for everybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you. And if it goes beyond that, that's where it gets a little bit more complex, right? And so if it's a 12-game suspension or even longer, you never know. If you have to do that, then I think it changes the story. Maybe you start that way, but you have to start peppering in someone else so you can get a little bit of variation, because the last thing Andy Reid wants to do is get stagnant. So then it becomes very dependent on Xavier Worthy's progression. And we know that he's had the hamstring thing. He hasn't been in OTAs, but he's getting a lot of mental reps, hanging out with Matt Nagy a lot. Mentally prepared, I feel, probably more so than most rookies are at this point for what he's going to have to do, but nothing changes getting on the field. When that happens, for me, it's about monitoring how well he learns and when he's ready to go from being what I think, and we will talk about tomorrow, is mostly an inside role, to being able to take on that outside role as well. Given his size, the press, and everything everybody wants to talk about, that's going to be, I think, the turning point is when he's ready and what else you can do with the offense. Yeah,
and I know we're talking about wide receivers, but I really do wonder if Watson's not a guy that can step in and play that position, if they don't try to go two tight end set more 30, 40, 50% of the time and change the way they play the offense and get Wiley on the field a lot with Kelce, get Gray on the field a lot with Kelce, and maybe just get it down to where you have a guy like Wiley and Kelce and Justin Watson and Hollywood Brown as your main receiving threats that you have out there, and then you're running with two huge tight ends and Justin Watson, who is still going to be able to probably run block if he can't be successful in the passing game, and Hollywood Brown. I think you got to feel pretty comfortable with that. You talk about Worthy, and I think you make a great point. He's likely to play mostly in the slot, and that's probably where he's going to be most successful, but he has the ability to play outside, and it's not necessarily going to be at the X position. It could be more at the Z, which I think Hollywood is going to play at the Z more as well, but he still will technically be an outside receiver. So it's going to be interesting to see how Kansas City makes this work this year. You look at other guys. Sky Moore is another guy that I guess could play technically outside in a sense. Kadarius Toney can play outside in a sense, not the X position, which we've been mainly talking about with Rashee Rice, but it's still an outside wide receiver. And if those guys are on the roster, you're going to have those types of guys that you can step in there and take some pressure off of a guy like Hollywood Brown not playing, 80 to 90% of the snaps. You want to give him a little bit more rest and get him acclimated to the offense the right way.
Yeah. There's two factors going on here, especially at the beginning of the season. We're just going to have to monitor in when is Rashee Rice available and when is he not, and what the progression is for one Xavier Worthy. Everything else can be dealt with by a number of players that are versatile on this team. But we also have to have specific depth to play outside, to be in contact, to be on the line of scrimmage and take press, snap after snap after snap. Who can help us the best with that? That's coming up next on the Locked On Podcast Network.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever really compared yourself to others? Have you looked at where you are in life and looked at social media and said, I really wish I was where this person is? If you do a lot of comparison, that could be a big thief of your joy. And it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on Instagram, but in reality, they don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking about starting therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Better HELP help.com/lockedon.
Replacing Rice is always a challenge, as it is replacing all the news that you want. So check out Locked On Sports today here on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV. I think depth is one thing that we've gone overboard on the last couple of years. They kept 7 wide receivers on the roster last year. There's a ton of them that are going to be going into this camp. But particularly playing on the outside and dealing with press, that's generally the role of an ex-receiver, although the Z's will have to do – you have to count them in as the outside guys. But there's not a whole lot more body types beyond Rashee Rice and Justin Watson. A lot of folks are going to want to talk about Justin Ross. Does he have an outside chance at this roster? I think he does. This is a very stacked group. I can go 9 deep and give you a reason to keep him on the roster, and I don't think they're keeping 7 this year. I think it's 6 or bust. So Ross being that type is an option. Do you think he has a shot at the roster?
You said something very key that I want to address really quick. They kept 7 last year, and they kept 7 guys who weren't able to get it done when they got playing time. And my point when I say that is, yes, you have depth. Yes, we could talk about there's, maybe 9 guys that could make this roster as we see it right now. And that's to be clear, because we haven't seen these guys go up in training camp. We haven't seen these guys actually do anything one-on-one when pads come on. It changes things, especially at the wide receiver position. So that's going to be something that'll be key. But you have to make sure it's depth that's going to actually give you somebody that can step in and actually be somebody that can be useful for you. You talk about a guy like Justin Ross, who social media and the Chiefs really played into this last year, showed him doing great things at training camp, but it never acclimated and never transferred to the field. And that's the big question with him. Can he take a step forward? This is going to be, I think, year 3 in the offense for him. I know his first year was basically a wash. His second year, he ended up being suspended for several games for an outside issue. If he is going to make this roster, he has to show that he can step in and play any of the positions on the offense, and he's going to be at the right place at the right time, and Mahomes is going to trust him. Does he have all of the talent in the world? Yes. It's the question of, can he be guaranteed to be where he is? Because one of the things that I would say from last year is, and I know people are going to argue about this, Sky Moore has talent, but he wasn't where he was supposed to be, and he wasn't doing the things that Mahomes was expecting him to do. There's a reason he didn't play a ton getting into the second half of the season. And I think that there's a similarity there, even though the body type and the talent is completely different. I think there's a similarity between him and Justin Ross.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And we're going to talk in depth about what that role will be tomorrow when we talk about guys that should be playing inside a little bit more. I completely agree with you. And this is the problem. As I look at the depth chart now, unless Rashee Rice goes to an exempt list where he doesn't have to be on the roster day 1, they changed that. This has to be a situation. Did they? Okay, so he doesn't have to be?
Yep. Yep, they changed that this year to where he is not required to be on the roster for suspension purposes, and IR as well. So the situations where you had to keep a guy to put him on IR is no longer an issue. It's just all done with roster cuts.
Okay, so the situation
Sorry,
remains,
I didn't mean to interrupt,
even if he's not on the roster. No, you're absolutely. I appreciate that. The situation to me, I'm trying to act like I'm Justin Ross's agent, right? The problem is, even with Rashee Rice not on the roster, whatever, if they're going to keep 6, which is absolutely what I think that they're going to do, he has to beat out one of these guys: Justin Watson, Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore, or Kadarius Toney. I don't see that happening. Do you?
I would say, and people are not going to like this, but I would say that Kadarius Toney is on the roster unless he gets in trouble or like they're not going to cut him or they trade him, because he's too, and I know people are going to like this either. He does have talent, and the Chiefs believe he's the most talented receiver on the roster. There's an argument to be made. I get it from their perspective in a way, but what I would say is, he has a guaranteed contract, so they save no money by keeping him. So the only reason that they would keep him is the only reason they wouldn't keep him is he got far outplayed by somebody else. And I don't think that's a guy. I don't think that Justin Ross can do that for Toney. Sky Moore is, I mean, you save money if you cut him. You save some money if you cut him. It's not a ton. I think it's like $900,000. I actually had an article about that, I believe, on a Friday last week. You can go check that out. The rest of them, Justin Watson, I mean, as of last year and what we saw last year, I can't see that. I mean, the way he was able to do things, the way he was able to be successful and step in, and Mahomes trust him, that's the biggest thing. I don't see him beating him. So it's going to be hard. And then Mecole Hardman is in a hard position anyway, because you're in a situation where if he's not going to be a returner, is he going to be a top 5 guy? I don't think so. It doesn't really look like it. Maybe early in the season without Rashee Rice, but he's not going to be somebody that you're going to want to have on the field all the time, because Mahomes will throw to him and trust him to an extent, but you can still see it's not fully there. But Mecole knows the offense. That's the key. Right. So he has the talent and he knows the offense.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And we're going to talk about Mecole's role, because he can probably play the Z just like Hollywood can. He can probably be better inside, and we're going to talk about the inside receivers tomorrow. So make sure that you join us there. Hopefully you like and sub this video, and you're one of us by now. The other guy that I think is really interesting is Jaren Hyatt. They brought it back. Long shot, let's be real, buried on the depth chart, but has the body type that if he catches fire in camp, much like Ross has before him, he could be the other guy that pushes in a way that has to probably play outside. I think the logjam inside, especially at slot, but even at Z, I don't think that's something for him. But do you have a feel for if that's even a possibility yet? Because it's a long shot in my mind, but not completely out of the realm of him at least beating Justin Ross to the practice squad.
So the big thing for me on Jaren Hyatt, and I haven't seen enough of him to know whether or not I think he really has a chance, but the big thing is he is a guy that could probably play your X position. And because of that, he has the ability to maybe step in when Rashee Rice gets suspended and maybe give you a little bit of something at that position. Whether or not that's actually on the active roster, I don't believe, but I think he could be, a practice squad guy, especially early on in the season. For somebody that they could call up if something happened to a Justin Watson or something happened to one of their other wide receivers. It at least gives you a receiver that would have been in your offense, would know the position, and would be able to step in and be somebody that can help. Maybe not help great, but at least play, take snaps that you're not trying to force into situations and force into limited snaps.
Agreed. You can't force that. It's got to be a developmental path. We've seen a number of guys take that developmental path, and a lot of them are coming together on focusing on either a Z or, more importantly, a slot role. Those guys we're going over tomorrow in depth, just like we did today. So don't miss that. If you want to know about Hollywood Brown versus Xavier Worthy versus Sky Moore versus Toney versus Hardman, Nico Remigio is going to be in there. We have a ton for you, so don't miss that tomorrow, because this is a wide and diverse group of wide receivers. And Andy, I think, is looking to be as diverse as possible this season, to have as many different skill sets. Who can make that cut? We're going over it in depth tomorrow. You have to be subscribed if you want to get on it, though. So make sure you like and sub this video right now. If you're on Spotify or Apple Music, make sure that you're subscribed to this on the audio side as well, because we are always here. And you can get that much more on our text line at 816-357-8781. We appreciate you being with us today. It's a brand new week, and we are that much closer to training camp. Wide receivers again tomorrow, and then we're going to run it down with Matt Derrick. We have a whole week planned for you. Don't miss a beat of it. Thanks for being with us today. We're going to talk to you tomorrow.